are the studio lines to call. Our identity on socials is at Super FM Lagos. That's across all social media platforms. All right, so be a part of the conversation. Follow online and follow on air. All right, so now, Dr. Charles, let's hear an overview from you on the current state of corruption in Nigeria.
Well, I mean, you know, I think we are ranked about 150 out of 180 on the 2023 corruption perception index.
Yeah.
But in terms of general state of corruption in Nigeria, I just remembered after, I remember I was going to do this interview. I remember something I wrote a few years back where I put on my Twitter feed then, and I put it as 18 manifestations of corruptions in Nigeria. You
Hmm.
see, because when we talk about corruption, I think if you ask 10 Nigerians what is corruption, you probably get 10 different definitions or what they perceive as corruption. So in that piece I did, I wrote the things that manifest as corruption and why, I think when countries say we can reduce corruption, we cannot eliminate it. You will see that the normal things like inefficiencies in government, inflated contracts,
Yeah.
conversion of government asset to private use, direct theft from government, abandoned contracts after mobilization, extortion from the public, non-remittance of revenue by NDAs, of course, cronyism and nepotism, indulging poor performance due to personal reasons, falsifying official records. The list goes on of what corruption is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the sad reality, I think, from my own analysis,
Yeah.
is the fact that Nigerians tends to focus on a very narrow definition of what they think is corruption,
Okay.
which, like I say, largely deals with the appropriation of public funds for private purposes. But many of them who will frown at that, for example, will not frown at nepotism as a form
Okay.
of corruption. So in
Okay.
a way, we tend to pick and choose which corruption we think is bad, which corruption, or our own definition of corruption, so to speak.
Yeah.
But if you look at it from the wider definition, then you find as a country, we have a lot to deal with. And if you look at the theme of this year, which has to do with the youth,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's rather apt because, as we'll see in the moment, as we proceed with our discussion, when we talk about adaptive challenge,
Yeah.
you actually find that a lot of the issues around corruption in Nigeria has become not just systemic, it has become cultural.
Okay.
And therefore, when you're talking about young people, they have imbibed, sadly, a lot of them have imbibed all the wrong things that
Okay.
the old people, so-called old people, have. So unless certain shift or major shift takes place, we actually might be perpetuating the same corruption that has, that's rampant among the old.
Mm.
I found that the young people will actually continue even more, continue the corruption on steroid.
Mm. Okay, so for you now, yeah, you've listed some of the issues when we talk about corruption. But for you now, which is more prevalent at this point in time? What is eating deep into our system when it comes to corruption?
Well, I mean, the truth is that it's difficult to pinpoint one because some of these things are like one is inextricably linked with something else. Um, Clearly, something to do with with our financial well-being as a country will be toppled on the list. Misappropriation of government funds, collecting contracts and not doing it, stealing from the government, all that. But employing or appointing people who are incompetent to positions in government, for example, is
Yeah.
a form of corruption,
Mm.
for example. So, and the effect of such is deep rooted in any country.
Mm.
It's just like, some of them might not be able to put naira and kobo to its effect, but we know that having the wrong people lead certain agencies or institutions in Nigeria actually means a lot of wastage takes place there. It means the benefits are not realized from the agency that the government want, and all kinds of things happen. So one act of corruption, which is employing the wrong person or an unqualified person to a particular role, can actually breed several manifestations of corruption below that. So, but the easiest that I think we can point to is exactly misappropriation of public funds or misallocation of public funds, as the case may be.
Okay. Just a quick one on that one too. How do cultural and social norms in the country perpetrate corruption? How do you think it does?
Well, that is the adaptive challenge, really, because when you want to deal with a problem such as corruption, you have what I call technical solutions, and then
Mm-hmm.
you have adaptive solutions. The technical challenge and adaptive challenge. The technical challenge deals with things like making sure the appropriate laws are in place to deal with anti-corruption,
Mm-hmm.
make sure the appropriate agencies or institutions are in place to deal with corruption. So all those in terms of as a country, Nigeria, I think we are okay in that regard. I think we even have quite a more stringent anti-corruption laws on our books than even several countries in the other countries in the world. So the technical solution is not a problem. So and I don't think anybody today or in recent past, at least as I can see, have advocated for new laws to deal with corruption in Nigeria because we realize that the issue is not the law. The issue is not the anti-corruption agencies in terms of their existence. Now, but the challenge is those are technical solutions. Now, the adaptive challenge is now dealing with, the mindset, so to speak, of the people.
Okay.
That's problem requiring changes in attitude, the value system, the behavior, of Nigerians. And that I think is the biggest challenge we have in Nigeria, and that is why corruption has perpetuated itself, because you have what I call cultural normalization of corruption in Nigeria.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So corruption is often seen as a way of life, deeply embedded in our cultural practices,
Mm.
such as gift giving and patronages. This cultural entrenchment makes legal and institutional reform insufficient
Mm.
to actually tackle corruption, because now
Okay.
you are dealing with the belief system of people.
Mm.
So, and I think that is where an effective cultural change or national reorientation campaign
Mm.
is actually needed to change people's attitude towards corruption. And
Mm.
I think until that happens, I mean, a very good example, is say, let's say in England, when they brought in the law, for example, that people must compulsorily wear a seatbelt. A lot
Yeah.
of motorists rebelled against it. That why should I wear a seatbelt? But then the government went on this massive campaign, part of which were television adverts showing what happens at different speed if you have an accident and you're wearing a seatbelt, and if you have the same accident without seatbelt. Over a period of 8 years, this campaign was heavy across the United Kingdom. And in those 8 years, public attitude changed from being resistant to wearing a seatbelt to now normalization and believing wearing a seatbelt. Same thing when the issue of drink driving, was also started in England. Same public education campaign to the point now where if you go to a pub to drink and they find that you are too drunk, they will seize your car key
Mm.
themselves. They say, no, we don't want you to drive, you are too drunk.
Too
So which
drunk.
means
Yeah.
public attitude has changed. But
Okay.
that's kind of thing we need in Nigeria,
Okay.
where and if we have time, we're able to look at how different countries have dealt with corruption. One
Mm-hmm.
of the ways, for example, some countries, including Singapore, Malaysia, have dealt with corruption is through public shaming.
Mm.
If you are caught and to be corrupt as a public official, you'll be named and shamed. Your families will feel ridiculed, they'll feel embarrassed. So over time, that helped to stigmatize corrupt people.
Mm.
But in Nigeria, you are corrupt, you go to your village, you'll be given chieftaincy title,
Well.
you'll be celebrated. So when you have such cultural allowance for corruption, it doesn't deter people from being corrupt. It just makes sure they try not to be caught.
Okay. Yeah, but Dr. Charles, now you've talked about, you've extensively talked about the cultural norm. But now, do you think this also creeps into the institutions, the anti corruption institutions? I mean, the personnel. Is this also a problem you'd identify that weakens the institutions?
Absolutely. No, no, it is exactly the same because these same Nigerians with this same value system are the same people manning these institutions. As a result of that, it affects the diligence with which they approach prosecution. And in fact, I've had the encounters in the past with staff of some of these agencies. I don't want to mention them, who deals with anti-corruption. And from what they say, you can see that psychologically they have a level of allowance for corruption.
Uh-uh.
For example, there was a particular case of a public official who was, I think, accused of stealing 200 billion or something. And I remember talking to one of the directors of this particular agency, and I said, "This is a terrible thing." And the next thing he told me was, I said, "Well," he said, "Doctor, that's true." He said, "I mean, he couldn't even steal 1 or 2 billion. He went to
Mm-mm.
steal 200."
Mm-mm.
Now, now, from the way he responded to me, he meant as a director in the anti-corruption agency, he feels certain level of corruption is okay.
It's okay. Can you imagine?
He just felt that guy was a bit greedy, and he stole too much.
Mm.
Now, that's the problem we are dealing with as a nation.
Yeah, yeah.
That even the enforcers of these laws, in their own mindset, because they are Nigerians like the rest of us, have certain psychological allowance for what they call certain sensible, in quote, in their own words, sensible level of corruption.
Mm.
But now, when they now bring these humongous figures, they get hungry. Not hungry at the corruption, but hungry at the audacity to steal that much.
Mm.
So
Okay,
that is the
yeah,
problem, and that affects prosecution,
yeah.
as well, and the kind of cases they bring. So there's no way you can have, a nation like that. I think I can't remember somebody who I watched on online recently said that if a band of thieves come together and they want to elect a leader, he said he doesn't think they will elect a pastor as their leader.
Oh, okay. Well, you know,
So one of
we
them.
need
That
that.
I think that's more or less the point he was saying, that
Okay.
Nigerians want an incorruptible leader,
Mm.
but we are not incorruptible people.
Well,
So how is that going to happen?
well, that's a big question. But now let's go over the anti-corruption agencies we have in the country, and I want you to just identify some of the challenges you think are peculiar to each agencies. I know the EFCC, the CCB, and some others you would enlighten us about. Their distinct roles and some of the challenges, how you think they've performed over time, and the necessary reforms you think would be needed.
Well, first of all, I mean, the challenge we have with those agencies in Nigeria, before I even go into them in any detail,
Yeah.
is this challenge I think we have with our security setup as a whole in the country. In many countries, Western countries and even in Africa, countries like Egypt and or the rest of them, if you are a public officer and you are accused of stealing, they report it to the police. Same in England. If you are, accused of taking bribe, they call the police. Now, the challenge we have here in Nigeria is we created silos of multiple agencies that did this with corruption.
Mm.
And the first problem that creates for us is they don't join the dots. So there are
Okay.
different pieces of information about you with different agency, so to
Okay.
speak. And sometimes the problem is nobody is looking at the overall picture. Everybody's prosecuting the area that deals with their own remit, as so to speak. Oh, but so in terms of anti-corruption
Yeah.
agencies in Nigeria, number one actually is the Nigerian police because
Okay.
of all the what's it called, security agencies in Nigeria that deal with civil affairs. Police, is the one clearly identified in the constitution. The
Mm-hmm.
rest are creations of National Assembly. So the existence of EFCC doesn't take away the power of the police to investigate, financial crimes, and they
Okay.
do. So the first is the police. Of course, the next is supposed to be EFCC. But then the problem with the EFCC, I mean, when in Nigeria, the idea when you create something, and then how it actually manifests down the line is
Mm.
always changing.
Okay.
When the idea behind EFCC is supposed to be a specialist team that investigates financial crime of certain nature, which means the crime have to have a level of complexity. The crime needs to have certain level of amount, which means you don't EFCC, you stole 1 million naira. That's not what EFCC should be dealing with. Police
Okay.
can deal with that. It's supposed to be for massive financial crime. And thirdly, it's supposed to be for what I call financial crimes of international nature. In other words, it require linking with other countries,
Yeah.
for cooperation and all that. That was the idea of EFCC. But now, if you look at EFCC's its existence, you actually find out that I've not done the full research in lately, but last time I did it a few years back, you actually find out that more than 80% of the prosecution of carried out by EFCC were for crimes of less than 20 million naira.
Hmm.
So clearly that's not the job of EFCC. And because they're bogged down in this little, EFCC sometimes, were being used as a debt collection agency. You hold me, we do some business, it goes wrong, you owe me 2 million naira, I report because I have contact in EFCC, and EFCC that comes to you, trying to, that's not the job of EFCC. So
Hmm.
they've bogged themselves down with all these little crimes, for want of a better word, that police should be handling, where they are supposed to be concentrating on what I call the big, massive, complex financial crimes, but that's not what they are doing. So the EFCC clearly need a lot of reform.
Okay.
It's supposed to be a specialist unit, so to speak. So we have the EFCC.
Yeah.
Uh, then of course we have the ICPC, the
ICPC.
Independent Corrupt Practices Commission. Um, Again, that tend to more or less focus on the people in the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
you know Again, that again is not even very effective. And the other thing about the posture of our anti-corruption agencies, even before I go on with this list, is that they mimic the posture of the country in terms of our security ethos. What I mean by that is that
Hmm.
Nigeria has what I call a reactive security posture rather than
Okay.
a proactive posture. Reactive means crime will have taken place and we're chasing the criminals. Whereas we are supposed to be preventing crime, we are supposed to be infiltrating these criminal gangs and
Mm-hmm.
preventing them from actually carrying out the crime in the first place. Same with what's it called? Anti-corruption. In some of these countries that I've mentioned that have anti-corruption agencies, they actually have a proactive posture, which means that if there is a report that, oh, this crime is going on in, say, immigration, for example, the
Yeah.
agency is in some of these other countries. They don't have to wait for anybody to report to them
Mm.
that something has happened. They can actually proactively carry out a sting operation to test it.
Mm.
So nobody needs to file any petition with them. Once they hear, oh, this is happening in this place, they will now set up, they have a unit that will
Yeah.
actually now go into that agency, pretend to be a customer or pretend to be whatever, undercover agent, to test whether indeed that's going on. And they use that to prosecute people. But in Nigeria, practically all of them wait for somebody to complain.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
if nobody is complaining, then it was one of those things that happened with James Ibori.
Yeah.
If you remember when he was being prosecuted in England,
Yeah.
for example, when in the case in England, the submission of Delta State government then was that there's no money missing from Delta State coffers. That's what they submitted to the London court.
Mm.
So more or less their lawyers was arguing that you are saying this guy stole from Delta State. Delta State said nothing is missing, nothing has been stolen from us.
Mm.
But because of the country they were in, they thought they were in Nigeria. Those ones
Yeah.
still prosecuted successfully, regardless of the denial of Delta State. That
Mm.
was why when it was very funny a few years later when some money seized from everybody was to be returned to Nigeria, and Delta State started saying it's our money, we need it back.
After
And
saying
then
no
some
money
of us
was
now
lost,
reminded them, I thought you said nothing was
nothing
missing
was
from
lost.
your coffers. Now you have a few million pounds coming back. Suddenly it's
It's
yours.
our money.
These are
Yeah.
the things happening. So the anti-corruption agency needs to be more proactive
Mm.
rather than being always reactive. Then of course we have the Code of Conduct Bureau. I mean that one is The Code of Conduct Bureau, I think, really need massive reform, because the whole idea is, want to see how much you are worth when you are being appointed into an office and how much you are worth after. But the truth is the fact that these numbers are always inflated. I know cases of people who, even the moment they get an idea, oh, you've been appointed, but you have not been announced as so person, and then within that 2 weeks, they will friends will borrow them money. The friends will change ownership of houses in their name
Wonderful.
just to inflate their worth. They will not put all that in their Code of Conduct Bureau form to say, well, I have 5 houses, I have 10 houses, I have whatever, whatever. Meanwhile, this guy doesn't have a single house.
Hmm.
So they do all that. And then, of course, the challenge is always the verification. Of course, the Code of Conduct Bureau, many people bribe their way, which is ironic, that they don't verify. Because if you say you own 15 houses, I must have documentary evidence. But a lot of
Yeah.
the time, CCB just takes this in on face value.
Mm.
So many people, more or less, somebody was making fun the other day. He said some people write in their CCB form how rich they want to be when they finish this office.
Mm.
So I have no house, but I will put on my form, I have 15 houses. I have
Because
20
that's the
cars.
goal.
I have so and so. I don't have any of those things. The whole idea is that by the time I finish, I want all those things to already be in existence. That's more or less what many of these people do. So CCB's verification exercise is where the devil is always in the detail. That's where that problem is. And then, of course, you have the NFIU. NFIU is not really, it's more of a database that should be consulted by all these anti-corruption agencies. They keep data of
Okay, I
money
think
coming in and going out of
we
Nigeria.
have a call here, but hello, good morning, Spotlight.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning to you, Spotlight. What's your
This
name
is
and where are you
Paula
calling?
from
Oh, Carla, good to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
I want to talk about this corruption that you are talking about.
Yes.
I think the problem we have is if you actually want to solve this problem of corruption, we need to solve the problem of our political process. I don't know whether I put it the right way.
Political
the
process.
leaders, technically, whatever you want to put it, it is easy if you have a good leader that has a political will to solve corruption problem and is competent. That is that is the two things. You need to have a good will to do it, and you need to know what to do. How to do it now is very, very simple. Gone are those days when we do not have this technology. We have technology. Where do we have this corruption? We have it at the level of civil servants. What you need to do is to put this civil service, make sure that you appoint very corrupt people as the head of the civil servant. And how do you do that? You can put them on polygraph. Put them on every civil servant, put all of the body after 3 months. All of them must pass through polygraphs, and you get tested. And if you are corrupt, you have stolen money in the last few months, or you have done something that's corrupt in the last 3 months, then you can be prosecuted for that.
Yeah.
So it is very easy now to do it because we have enough technologies to do it. The problem here is the people, are they going to elect leaders that will actually fight this corruption?
Well, that's what the guest is saying. Cultural norm. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So we should mostly when we talk about corruption itself, we focus more on the leader. That's what I'm saying.
All right.
We should focus more on the people, the electorate who are electing these leaders. If you elect corrupt leaders, you are going to get corrupt society. That is just it. Thank you.
All right, Kola, thank you so much. So this is Spotlight on Super FM. Today is International Anti-Corruption Day, and it's a very, very important day for us. Like we know, we are beautiful people, of course, but we have to talk about corruption. I mean, we can't kid ourselves, all right? So you can call the studio line 0805 092 0927 or 0705 890 4927. We have our guest, Dr. Charles Omole, with us on the line right now, and he's a lawyer and public affairs analyst, institutional reforms advocate, and lots more. So he's giving us insight on corruption. We're beaming the spotlight on that this morning. All right, please go on. We had our caller. He called to buttress what you had said about the cultural norm. He's saying that the people should be able to elect leaders that will be corrupt free. That was a caller's contribution, Dr. Charles.
Oh, okay. Well, like I said, apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. If the people making those choices are corrupt free, then of course there's a high likelihood you have a corrupt free leader.
We are
But if the
corrupt.
people, making, I mean, every day there's a sentence I make when I deal with people, even whether my drivers or even people I meet in shops or whatever. I look at them when they do something and I say, and you will say government is our problem. You are our problem because they do things in a way that shocks you. And you ask yourself, these are the people criticizing government
Mm,
or
mm.
government officials.
Yeah, but
So this cultural acceptance of corruption
mm,
is a major challenge, I think.
mm,
Um, and I think if you look at it in terms of the adaptive challenge of
yeah. So not
anti-corruption
not to
in Nigeria, we
interject,
have weak institutional capacity.
institutions.
I've
Yeah.
explained that many of these just don't have the cultural normalization of corruption as a way of life, the political will.
Mm. Dr. Charles, I hate to cut you
Yes.
in there, but we're having a flow just before the call came in. You were talking of the NFIU. We're going over the anti-corruption agencies we have in the country as it is.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes, and yes, NFIU is to be like I said, it used to be part of EFCC before it was taken out. It's supposed to be transactions of I think technically over $10,000 should be captured by NFIU in terms of where the money is coming from, where the money is going. So they have the digital footprint of all money is coming in and out of Nigeria, and
mm,
they have uh, sort of links with their international counterparts in different countries. So EFCC, ICPC, all of them, even the police are supposed to
mm,
use that data to investigate and prosecute as the case may be.
mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
again, the issue here is you have different. I mean, in terms of anti-corruption agency, I think mainly those are the ones NFIU,
Yeah. EFCC and the rest.
ICPC,
Okay.
CCB, you know, uh,
So Dr. Charles, where does
police and stuff.
yeah, okay. So where does I understand that the judiciary is an arm of government, but where does it come in? Because I understand that there are rules of engagement with personnel of these institutions, and then judiciary is meant to interpret these laws and ensure that even if you say the shaming thing, I think the bulk of it is with the judiciary to ensure that these laws are interpreted and you get your fair punishment. So where does the judiciary come in all of this to help? How do you think it has handled the corruption fight so far in the country, and what are some challenges?
Okay, some of the challenges the judiciary have created in relation to anti-corruption cases, I think is similar to the challenge they have created with several other cases. I remember in my days when I was on the bench back in London, there were clear judicial guidelines, for example, on matters like adjournment. I mean, whether the prosecution or the defense, you all have one bite of the cherry to seek adjournment once. After the first adjournment, you need to show me somebody was killed on the way to the court that morning for me to agree for a second adjournment
Mm,
because of the rules around diligent, processing of cases. But in Nigeria, a case could be adjourned 20 times,
okay.
for example, and that 20 times could mean 5 years now, and there's no repercussion. So as a result of this is what makes corruption cases, unlike just like any other cases, last for too long. When somebody is still being prosecuted, I mean, the first what I call the first class of governors from 1999 to 2003, I think, that those first class, some of them are still have cases still today.
Mm,
So when you are prosecuting somebody for 15 years, for 20 years, I mean, clearly, you know, witnesses will have died, records would clearly have gone missing, and so many. So the issue of judiciary, I think, is twofold. Number one, what kind of evidence do you bring before the court? So that this is what I'm not blaming the judiciary
Yeah,
for.
but
This is
Dr.
what I'm blaming
Charles,
the anti-corruption agencies for.
yeah, but
Because
you know,
yes,
yeah, the thing is, why I brought in the judiciary, there's only so much the anti-corruption agencies can do. Take, for example, you uncover some kind of looting and whatnot, and then the person is taken to court, right? And that rests to the judiciary. But then, lately we've seen a lot of conflicting court orders when it comes to governance, elections, and whatnot. And now it's like the judiciary is used as a tool by politicians in the country. That's what some would argue. So it's a very important arm of government if we're going to talk about corruption. And again, there's been conversations about the appointment. Some judicial, that's your field. I'm not, but they're saying that some are appointed and it should be independent so that there isn't the political influence when it comes to judicial matters. So your thoughts?
that is true. No, no, actually, that is true in the sense that that's why I said the problem judiciary has is not just related to anti-corruption. We have problems with the judiciary, period. And it's just manifesting when it comes to anti-corruption cases in terms of people influencing the judiciary. I mean, when you have the key people being prosecuted for corruption in Nigeria are largely public service office holders and politicians. And then you find that majority of our judges are related or family members of the same class of people. So that instantly creates conflict of interest. So that's the case for a more independent appointment regime in our judiciary.
Mm.
But more importantly, I think, in terms of the judiciary, is they need speedier prosecution and they need a more robust, what I call it, punishment, so to speak.
Mm.
Because sometimes you see the punishment for those who are found guilty is not commensurate with the crime.
Mm.
So it's important, I think, that the judiciary use these people as examples once they are prosecuted successfully.
Mm.
So there is a problem in terms of the time it takes to prosecute and the kind of punishment that the courts can they tend to impose these days.
That's okay.
They don't deter people.
All
They
right.
don't deter people. And
Okay.
it's a whole full circle of it. You have a
Yeah.
situation, and then linked to that is our prisons. I know it's a minor case, the Bobrisky saga,
Yeah, well,
showed
most times Bobrisky is not very popular. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Okay.
who are prosecuted, they also have the under jail.
Okay.
So so if you look at the whole cycle, it just
Yeah.
seems to feed and perpetuate corruption.
All right, Dr. Charles. Now, for the sake of time, because I want us to cover as much as we can when it comes to corruption. Now, you put the police force at the top of the list when you were talking about the anti-corruption agencies. So, what are some challenges? I didn't hear you mention funding, though. Do you think that's also a major challenge with the anti-corruption agencies? But let's focus on the police now, because what do you think the challenges are, and what necessary reforms are needed, and also your thoughts on the state policing, that has been going on strongly in NAS and among some Nigerians. So, your thoughts on the police force?
Well, I mean, yes, Nigerian police is grossly underfunded. That is without saying. That's without doubt. Although to give some consideration to governments, not just this government, all governments. Part of the challenge with funding of our police in Nigeria is the fact that we measure it purely based on budgetary allocation to the Nigeria Police Force. But if you look at budgetary allocation to all institutions that perform policing function, you find that Nigeria actually spend a lot on policing. That part of the problem is this duplication and overlapping mandates of different agencies that all perform policing related duties. I mean, like I always said, if you take the Egyptian police, for example, the function performed by the Egyptian police is performed by 9 different agencies in Nigeria. So we've split it into little silos. So when we look at funding for the police, we have to look at funding for all policing related agencies, and that's a lot. But if you focus on Nigerian police as it is, there is a funding issue, there's an expertise issue. Clearly, once the EFCC was created, the capacity of the police to grow their financial crimes capacity was weakened, so to speak. And then but we have the good thing is we have a police leadership now that is reinvigorating that area within the police. So there is a funding issue, but the funding issue is not so much of is in terms of personnel and is in terms of personnel and equipment and tools needed to prosecute financial crimes. So, and like I also said, that we need a situation where even the police will change its posture away from being reactive to being
Mm.
proactive. I think the general mindset in Nigeria, the way our legal landscape is set up, is such that we wait for somebody to file a complaint. For
Mm.
example, in India, their Supreme Court, the way courts are set up in different countries are different. For example, in India, the Indian Supreme Court could hear of maybe a major a constitutional or legal challenge between two key institutions or between a citizen and government. And the Indian Supreme Court can actually call for that case to be brought in a
Mm.
proactive way. In other words, neither of the parties have filed any case with the Supreme Court yet. The Supreme Court can now proactively request that, okay, we're interested in this case, bring it.
Mm.
Whereas in Nigeria, until you file proactively, the court just folds its hand, because nobody has filed a petition. That's the way our constitution is set up. Now, in terms of state police, my challenge with the state police, again, is that in Nigeria, we tend to think in silos. We don't understand that this is like a net. If you pull one, that one will pull three other things. For example, the issue of state police is such that if you create state police, I mean, we've had state police or equivalent before. At independence, we had three layers of policing in Nigeria. We had the Nigerian Police Force, which is a federal police. We had the regional police for regional government. Then we have the local native police for, the local governments. So we have three layers. So we've gone through this road before, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
And then, what happened? Nigerians were complaining bitterly about corruption of the police. So much so that in 1966, Ironsi, the then head of state, put together a panel of experts to look at all this accusation of corruption against the police. And the expert came back with a report that, look, it is true, and that their own advice is police should be centralized. That's
Mm.
what led to the current Nigerian police force that was finally consolidated in 1968,
Mm.
when all the local and regional police were mopped up into the one Nigerian police force. So when people are saying we want state police, I guess the first thing I want to let them know is that we've been through that road before. It didn't work. That's why we centralized it.
Mm.
So people now saying we should go back to state police again need to understand what made the previous rodeo, what made it not to work.
Mm.
Because if we don't understand that, we are just recreating problems all over again.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number
Yeah.
two is that when they centralized the police to create Nigerian police force after Ironsi, they also had to centralize prisons. Before, prisons were owned by regional governments. Now, prison became a federal prison service. Now, what that means, if you create state police, that means there's a cost of state policing that the state will bear. That's number one. But consequentially, it also means you now have to create state prisons, because 90+% of our crimes in Nigeria are state crimes. So you cannot commit state crime, be prosecuted by state police, and then sent to federal prison. It doesn't work like that. You have to take it to a state prison. So which means state governors will now have to build their own prisons,
Mm.
so to speak. So
Yeah.
again, there's a cost attached to that. So by the time you look at all the attendant costs, it's not just about having state police. You're going to have state prison. You're going to have increased state prosecutors. You have to build more courts. Have to employ more lawyers. By the time you combine all that together, how many states in Nigeria can bear that cost?
Mm.
That is the challenge. And
Okay.
that is why I am saying that under the current financial settlement, I do not support the idea of state police. Because at the end of the day, we are just creating more problems for ourselves.
Mm.
Even as federal police, sometimes it takes the 15th of the month before the police are paid, sometimes because of financial challenge, even federal government is paying. Imagine our state owing police 6, 7 months salary. That's
Okay,
chaos.
but Dr. Charles, an argument on that would be that state policing will allow the police officers to be closer to the communities and the people where we have this insecurity attacks often. Do you think that's a valid? Because now the thing is, like I said, the argument is when you're closer, then you can easily trail and track some of the perpetrators of this criminals and terrorists in areas across the country. So do you think that's valid?
It's a valid point, but you don't need state police to have that. You could do that within the current police system through effective community policing, which means, and that's a challenge that the police have not really engaged community policing the way it's supposed to be. By that I mean you need to recruit new sets of police officers that are community police officers, and their rules will be slightly different. For example, part of the problem against the implementation of effective community policing in Nigeria so far has been this police policy of transferring people, staff. If you see anybody who's been in police for say 10 years, you probably will have worked in 4 or 5 states. They move them around. Clearly, if you want to do community policing, those cadre of officers will be exempt from that rule or being moved around, because there's no point me spending 1 year to be known by the community only for me to be transferred. And then a new officer comes to replace me and starts that process all over again. So there are ways to implement community policing within the current structure that is not being done. That can be done, because if I feel safe in my house, then whether it's state police, general police, international police is irrelevant. All I need, I want to be safe. So there are ways of implementing that local knowledge and local connection with the communities through the existing police force. You don't need state police for that, because the challenge you're going to face really is the fact that, you remember I told you about the effect of the corruption allegations against the local native police
Yeah.
in the 60s.
Yeah.
One of the key problems the expert panel found out was that the local native police, the initial intake to form that local native police, were made from palace guards of the different kings and emirs. So because they wanted in the community, people who have a little bit of knowledge of law enforcement, so to speak. So they went to the palace guards, the local emirs, or some of their guards were recruited into the police. That effectively made the local police an appendage of these local chiefs, so to speak.
Yeah.
So in the same way here, local element is important, but it also can create a problem of corruption that we're talking about here. Because if you employ local people known to the locality as police officers, that can help with policing in one direction, but also it can hinder policing in another direction. So this needs to be balanced, so to speak. So I feel state police, therefore, within the current financial settlement, is not advisable, but community policing and community links with police can be institutionalized and implemented and operationalized under the current police settlement.
Certainly.
And that doesn't require any change in law for that to happen. We just need the political will to get it done.
All right. So, Dr. Charles, how effective do you think institutional reforms and even advocacy have been in strengthening anti-corruption efforts in the country so far?
Well, I think in terms of advocacy have shone light on the problem, but I don't think the effective reform has taken place as it should be. From my experience, one of the number one tool, as example that comes to mind easily, is a country called Estonia. Estonia is a country where 99% of government services can be delivered and requested and delivered from your bedroom. They started a massive e-government program where you don't need to see any physical human being to get a lot of public sector services delivered. And I think Nigeria needs to embrace that. Evidence, even in Nigeria, on the limited ways we've done it, has shown that any time we bring technology to deliver public services, corruption is reduced.
Mm.
So that you have very little interface. A very good example in a small way is the issue of what's currently happening in the passports in the immigration service. Some of the ways this government have implemented things where you can apply, for passport without physically needing to see anybody. Everything's on. It increased service delivery and made it more
Mm.
effective. But
Mm.
more importantly, it has reduced corruption within the passport service. Because
Okay.
when you don't have physical human being asking you any question then computer won't ask you for bribe.
You'll be
So
stunned.
so 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 in a way, so we need massive rollout of e-government in the country.
Yeah. All right. So
I mean, very good. So it's very, very, it's very, very important. I mean, the other
important.
thing
Yeah.
quickly, related to that of e-government, and e-government talks about service delivery to the people.
Yeah.
But there's another inward side of e-government, which is how government actually runs itself. A
Mm.
few years back, I was, in the Ninth Assembly, a National Assembly, as an advisor to the then Speaker, Gbajabiamila, at that time.
Yeah.
And I remember that it took 6 months for me to get my first paycheck.
Uh-uh.
When I
Why?
investigated what the problem was, you find out in National Assembly, and that's still obtained still today. When you are recruited, your onboarding is done manually. So your file goes from one department, literally physical file,
Hmm.
from one department to another. These are things that technology can do in 2 days. You can be onboarded.
Yeah.
So
Well.
when you want to find out what's happening, you start calling every department, where's my file? Where's my file? Until you find your file.
Mm.
And then, of
But
course, what that means is that
but
for your
now,
file to move from A to B,
yeah.
you have to go and see them.
Okay, Dr. Charles. Now, yeah, I want to take this comment on Facebook, but I was going to ask you. We talk a lot about technology, but do you think certain things will have to be put in place first? I don't know how it works with tech, but don't we need enough power? Don't we need enough light and other things in place to do that?
Yes, you do. You do in terms of access, but in terms of the provisioning, power is built into it. What I mean by that is that if a government department is putting their services online, part of the infrastructure, technical infrastructure needed, will be a backup power, either solar or another form of power that gives 24-hour power. Then, of course, you have the challenge of now the public accessing the service. Do they have power? Clearly, it sounds like a chicken and egg situation. But I think I would prefer a situation where a department puts all the services online. As part of that provisioning, they have backup power to make sure that service is online. We can now work on the power supply to the Nigerians accessing that service. As
Mm.
that improves, they'll be able to access it more. If it observe the wind will not sow. If we are waiting for power to be perfect before we move, this
Mm.
country is in trouble. We
Trouble. Yeah.
have to begin to develop things
Mm.
in anticipation, and some things can be done in parallel.
Yeah. Yeah, I asked because, sometimes we've heard reports of PHCN going to cut public office lights. We've heard of, them cutting lights in public offices, that's government offices. But now, this comment by Prince Udeng, it says, International Anti-Corruption Day 2024. Nigeria Police Force on this occasion. I salute all federal agents. We all know some huge amounts has historically been discovered in Kaduna State. And regularly, some of these gallant officers pay the ultimate price while trying to carry out the duty. Okay, yada yada, kudos, God bless Nigeria. Okay, do you want to comment on, because the EFCC had something to say about recovered funds, saying that they're vowing that they will protect any recovered loot. And, they got a lot of backlash from Nigerians. That's as recent as over the weekend. So do you want to comment on that, some of the activities, just as we'll wrap it up, when it comes to monies recovered and the way forward, really? How can anti-corruption strategies be tailored to Nigeria's unique context and challenges that you have listed?
But in terms of recovered loot, I mean, the EFCC will not say they will protect the recovered funds the way they've said it. If that's the case at the moment, or have always been the case. To my knowledge, um, EFCC tends to recover funds or goods. By goods, I mean cars, houses, and so forth. Now, the funds are a bit easier to trace. And by and large, I think, under the Buhari administration, the system was put in place for those recovered funds to be put to some good use for the nation. The major challenge the EFCs have always had is when they recover services, recover goods and properties, for example. That's when you begin to hear a car that's worth 50 million is being sold for 2 million for some people. The normal Nigeria corruption enters the whole thing. So the next thing you now see is they'll come out and say, okay, we have raised 1 billion from sales of properties that we recover from corrupt politicians, and people clap for them. But when you look at the detail, that 1 billion they raised could easily have been 50 billion if those assets were sold for their market value. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that it's the real problem. I think the anti-corruption agencies EFCC in particular, need to deal with. There needs to be a more transparent way for the public to bid. I mean, it's not just the EFCC. It happens with customs. Sometimes it even happens with the police when they do auction, as it were, for things they seized and they are allowed to dispose of. Public actually don't have the effective way of bidding for these things and paying market value for them. So what tends to happen is a lot of them will have distributed among themselves, give themselves some very ridiculous rate. So changing the public and the government through that process. So clearly there has to be a more effective way of monitoring what EFCC does with the
monies
with
recovered.
the goods and assets it seizes. The financial side is a bit easy because you're about to deposit the money in a CBN account. So that's easier to track. But it's the biggest problem. Okay, for example, now they're talking about some 750 duplexes of an estate in Abuja that was recovered, that was forfeited to the government recently.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the business case of that, because I read about it, the business case of the people who stole the money to build that, their plan was to sell each of those duplexes for 200 million naira each.
Okay, Dr.
You will not be surprised if you now see that the government now dispose of those duplexes for 1 or 2 million each.
Imagine. And the Nigerians will rush to buy it.
So that's what happens. They will dispose of some ridiculous rate, and that perpetuates the corruption.
Well, on the clock now, I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's insightful. But I want you to wrap it up with how you think anti-corruption strategies can be tailored into the country's unique challenges that you've mentioned.
Yes, I mean, the number one thing I would say is really two things. Number one, I call it behavioral nudges and psychological strategies. That, I say, has to do with public shaming of corrupt officers. We need to establish a platform to publicize corruption convictions and recovered assets.
Okay.
Indonesia has their anti-corruption agency called KPK. They do that a lot. Naming and shaming, I call it. So, then I'm talking about it. The second is cultural and educational reorientation. Right from primary school, we need to have books that have anti-corruption messages woven into our educational system. There needs to be a more effective public engagement and strategic communication by the National Orientation Agency to actually, I mean, if those who are holding up during the Buhari first military head of state government, we actually find that there was something then called war against indiscipline.
Yeah.
We call it Y.
Yeah.
With that to do, and there was massive radio and the TV campaign that had to do with queuing, not crossing the express, and all that. And it worked.
Yeah, Dr. Charles, I'm kicked out of the studio now, so I have to go. But thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the program. I hope to have you back I hope to have you back soon. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right then. All right, that's it. Today is International Corruption Day. The EFCC is calling on Nigerian youths to be a part of the corruption fight. So what are you doing today? Just take today off and not be part of any corrupt activity, all right? Thank you for staying tuned to Super FM. Spotlight will be back here tomorrow. I am Kimberly. Enjoy the rest of the day's broadcast. Cheers.
And no. Your number one radio